You map out every bathroom before you leave the house. You check the exits. You eat with one eye on the clock and the other on the nearest door. Food isn't pleasure anymore, it's a threat. If this is you, if you've cut out dairy, gluten, and sugar, tried low FODMAP, keto, paleo, and still wake up in pain, first, I see you. You're exhausted. You're grieving meals. You're terrified of public places because your gut is unreliable. I need to tell you something many people with IBD and severe gut distress don't want to hear, and many clinicians don't say clearly enough. It's not always the food itself that's the problem. You are treating the symptom, the flare, by starving it, but you may be missing the place where the war is actually happening. Inside your gut is a thin, slippery barrier, a living film of mucus and cells that I like to call the mucosal armor. It's designed to separate the world inside your gut, food, bacteria, debris, from the rest of your body, and to let nutrients pass while keeping nasties out. When that armor is strong, you can eat and move on with life. When it's damaged, everything changes. Now imagine that armor getting scraped away, not by one big thing, but by years of tiny insults, hidden emulsifiers in healthy, packaged foods, the heavy footprint of repeated antibiotics, chronic stress that tightens your nervous system, and everyday NSAIDs or alcohol. These erode the mucus, thin the protective coating, and create microscopic tears, holes you can't see and your doctor may not find on a standard scan. Those micro tears are the turning point. When they open, partially digested food particles, bacterial products, and environmental toxins start to slip through the lining and brush against tissues and immune cells that do not belong to the gut lumen. Your immune system is not confused, it's alarmed. It detects these intruders and flips the red switch. It mounts a full-scale inflammatory response, and that is the spiral you've been living inside: intense cramping, urgent diarrhea, bloody stools, and maddening unpredictability. This is why strict elimination diets often fail. They can reduce the fuel for inflammation temporarily, but they do nothing to patch that leaking armor. You can starve the symptoms and still leave the holes open. Without repairing the barrier, the same cycle restarts the moment something new or even benign crosses the gut. So what if I told you the real shift is not only about what you avoid, but about actively rebuilding and protecting that mucosal shield, creating a biological bandage that reduces leaks, absorbs what's escaping, and gives your immune system permission to stand down? In the next chapter I'll show you, clearly and simply, what this mucosal armor is made of, how it tears, and, importantly, how we can begin to patch it safely and scientifically. Alright. Let's lift the hood and look at the actual biology. When I say mucosal armor, I'm talking about a living, layered defense system built right into your intestine. It's not a single wall. It's a soft, dynamic shield made by your body to let the good stuff through, nutrients, while keeping the dangerous stuff out. The central structural element of that shield is a family of giant proteins called mucins, especially one called MUC2 in the colon. Goblet cells sprinkled along the lining secrete mucins, which form a dense, sticky gel. A two-layer system. An inner dense layer that's essentially bacteria-free and an outer, looser layer that houses friendly microbes. This mucus is the first line of defense for preventing bacteria and particles from touching the epithelium. Think of it like a wet, living Velcro that holds back the messy, hostile outside from the delicate tissues beneath. When it's healthy, you don't even notice it, digestion happens, your immune system stays calm, and you live your life. But when that gel thins or becomes patchy, the situation changes dramatically. How does that gel thin? Multiple, often invisible forces chip away at it over time. Repeated antibiotic use can alter the microbiome and reduce signals that keep goblet cells producing healthy mucus. Chronic stress and inflammatory medications can change secretion and repair. And, crucially, certain industrial food additives called emulsifiers have been shown in experimental models to erode the mucus layer and let bacteria get closer to the epithelial cells. Those closer bacteria change how the immune system reads the gut environment. In mice, two common emulsifiers, carboxymethylcellulose and polysorbate 80, caused the mucus to thin and allowed microbes to encroach on the epithelium, triggering low-grade inflammation and colitis in susceptible animals. Human data are early but worrying. Controlled feeding studies show that adding certain emulsifiers can increase post-meal discomfort and shift microbiota composition in ways linked to inflammation. This is not hand-waving, it's mechanistic biology that helps explain real symptoms. When the mucus layer becomes patchy, it creates microscopic breaches in the barrier. I call these microtears because they're not large enough to show up on a scope as a dramatic ulcer, but they're big enough for partially digested food fragments, bacterial products, and environmental molecules to slip through and brush the immune system in the tissue beneath. Over time, that constant drip of foreign material trains immune cells to stay on high alert. That's the core of why I say your immune system isn't confused. It's acting logically on the data it's being fed. Foreign particles in the wrong place equals danger. The immune system then recruits inflammatory cells, releases cytokines, and that cascade produces the pain, cramping, bleeding, and urgency you live with during flares. Fixing food choices alone doesn't stop the flow through those microtears. So what can we measure or see? Clinically, we can test for increased intestinal permeability and look at biomarkers of mucosal damage and inflammation. But the trick is, a normal scan doesn't rule out these microtears. They can be subtle, intermittent, and molecular in scale, which is why many people cycle through diets, feel a little better, then flare again when the underlying barrier remains unrepaired. The encouraging part, the mucosal layer is built to regenerate. Goblet cells can be encouraged to produce more mucus, mucin production can be supported, and the environment that allows repair, a calmer immune state, a healthier microbiota, and a protective coating while repairs happen, can be created. That is the scientific opening for a therapeutic strategy that focuses not just on what you avoid, but on actively patching and protecting the mucosal armor while the body does its repair work. In the next chapter, I'll map out the practical elements of a regeneration protocol, what science suggests can absorb the leak, what can soothe and coat the wounded surface, and how to create the biochemical environment for goblet cells and mucins to come back stronger. We'll also cover safety and interactions, because some agents can interfere with medications or nutrient absorption if misused. Quick clinical note. These ideas are grounded in mechanisms and emerging clinical data, but every patient is different. Before adding supplements or major changes, check with your gastroenterologist, especially if you're on immunosuppressants or biologics. Now we meet the real villain in your story. And it's not gluten. It's not dairy. It's not carbs. The villain is something far more powerful and far more reactive. It's the immune panic triggered by a breached gut barrier. When your mucosal armor develops microtears, tiny particles that were never meant to cross into your bloodstream begin slipping through. Undigested food fragments. Bacterial toxins like lipopolysaccharides. Metabolic waste. These molecules don't belong on the sterile side of the gut wall, but now they're there. Your immune system is not confused. It is responding exactly as it was designed to. When immune cells detect foreign molecules in the bloodstream, they sound the alarm. They release inflammatory messengers, cytokines, recruiting more immune cells to the scene. What begins as defense quickly becomes collateral damage. This inflammatory cascade increases blood flow, fluid leakage, and nerve sensitivity in your intestinal wall. That's why you feel cramping that doubles you over. That's why urgency feels like a fire alarm you can't ignore. That's why bloating feels explosive, not just uncomfortable. In conditions like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, This immune reaction doesn't just flicker, it amplifies. The constant leak keeps feeding the alarm system. Inflammation damages tissue further, widening the barrier dysfunction. More leak. More immune response. It becomes a vicious biological loop. And here's where the dieting trap becomes cruel. You eliminate foods hoping to reduce symptoms. Sometimes you get temporary relief, because there's less material crossing those tiers. But the structural breach remains. The wall is still fragile. The immune system is still primed. Imagine a house with a broken roof during a storm. You can remove furniture to prevent damage, but if you never fix the roof, the rain keeps coming in. Restrictive diets are furniture removal. Repairing the mucosal barrier is fixing the roof. When you understand this, something powerful happens. You stop blaming yourself. You stop thinking, "I must have eaten the wrong thing." Instead, you realize your immune system is in survival mode because the barrier has been compromised. And survival mode always feels extreme. The good news? If the trigger is the leak, not the food, then the strategic focus shifts. Instead of endlessly subtracting foods, we begin asking, how do we absorb what's leaking through? How do we soothe the inflamed tissue? How do we help rebuild the mucosal shield so the immune system can finally stand down? In the next section, I'll show you how a structured, mucosal matrix protocol can interrupt this immune panic cycle at its root. Okay, now the hopeful part. If the problem is a leaking mucosal shield and an immune system in panic, the solution has three pieces: absorb, coat, and support. I call that the mucosal matrix strategy. Step 1. Absorb the leak. We want something in the gut that acts like a gentle biological sponge. It grabs and holds on to toxic bacterial products, residual irritants, and some of the molecules slipping through the microtiers so they don't keep feeding the immune alarm. In natural medicine, one of the best studied adsorbents for this purpose is bentonite, montmorillonite, clay. A mineral clay with strong adsorption properties shown in reviews and recent studies to reduce intestinal toxins and bacterial products in experimental models. Important safety note right here. Clays are not chemical selective. They will also bind some medications and nutrients, and some commercial clays have been shown to contain heavy metals if not third-party tested. So we always use only food-grade, independently tested bentonite, and we space it away from prescription medicines, generally by approximately 2 hours, and follow a clinician's advice. Step 2. Coat the tiers. While the clay is absorbing what's leaking, we want a soothing, mucilage-rich coat over the damaged lining so fragile tissue can rest and repair. That's where slippery elm, a mucilaginous tree bark, and aloe vera gel come in. They create a physical, soothing film that reduces friction and irritation and have been used historically for GI complaints. Aloe even showed clinical benefit in a randomized trial for ulcerative colitis. 100 milliliters twice daily for 4 weeks produced more clinical responses than placebo. Slippery elm has promising human and clinical review signals for symptom relief and mucosal soothing, though the evidence is still limited and mixed. Here's a simple, clinician-minded mucosal matrix outline you can discuss with your provider. 1. Patch and amp. Bind for the first 2 to 4 weeks. Take a tested bentonite clay product once daily between meals. Follow the product label. 2. Coat 1 to 3 times daily with slippery elm, powder or capsule as product directs, and, if appropriate and tolerated, aloe gel at a clinically studied dose. The Aloe UC trial used 100 milliliters twice daily for 4 weeks. 3. Support gut repair with nutrients known to help mucosal healing, for example, glutamine and zinc, while you're patching the lining. Then reassess symptoms and labs at 4 weeks and plan a maintenance phase with your clinician. A few practical rules I always emphasize. Always use food-grade, lab-tested clay. Check for third-party heavy metal testing. Take clay and mucilage between meals and 2 hours away from prescription drugs to reduce the chance of binding them. If you're pregnant, breastfeeding, a child, or on immunosuppressants, biologics, check with your gastroenterologist first. We need to be extra careful. Mechanistically, this approach interrupts the vicious loop. The clay reduces the amount of inflammatory material crossing the barrier. The slippery aloe soothes the exposed tissue and reduces ongoing irritation. And supportive nutrients help goblet cells and tight junctions rebuild the mucin scaffold. Together, that lowers the immune noise, so your immune system can down-regulate and stop attacking the gut itself. That's how we treat the cause, not only the surface symptom. This is also the practical reason I created a curated mucosal matrix option called SynoGut, not as a miracle cure, but as a convenient, third-party tested combination that pairs a food-grade bentonite binder with standardized slippery elm mucilage and aloe gel, plus clear instructions about spacing from meds and safety checks. It's designed for an initial 4-week trial to see if interrupting the leak calms your flares. Take this as a clinician's suggestion to discuss with your care team, not a replacement for medical therapy. What should you expect in a 4-week trial? For many people, you'll see a reduction in urgency, less bloating and softer, more predictable stools, and lower day-to-day pain. Because mucosal repair takes time, improvements are often gradual. A few days to notice less urgency, 2 to 4 weeks to notice more consistent stool form, and longer for full mucosal restoration. If you worsen or develop new worrying symptoms, high fever, severe bleeding, fainting, stop and contact your clinician right away. I want to be clear. These agents are supported by mechanistic studies, animal models, and some human trials, aloe and small herbal studies, but large randomized trials testing a combined clay plus mucilage protocol in IBD are limited. That's why we frame SynoGut as a rational, biology-based support protocol, promising and plausible, not proven as a standalone cure. Always combine it with medical care when you have IBD. If you're tired of living in the dieting trap, this is a different, science-informed path. Patch the holes, calm the alarm, and then work on long-term resilience. If you want, the link in the description has a clinician-curated SynoGut starter pack and a printable checklist to take with your gastroenterologist. Next, we'll walk through daily habits that protect the mucosal armor so repairs actually stick, small changes that make a big difference. You made it this far, and that matters. If you've been living in fear of food, remember, the goal isn't to punish your plate forever. It's to rebuild the biological shield that lets you eat with less terror and more confidence. Quick recap. The pattern we break is leak right pointing arrow immune panic right pointing arrow inflammation. We interrupt that by absorbing what's leaking, coating the damaged spots so they can rest, and supporting the biological systems that make mucus and tighten junctions. That's the mucosal matrix approach we just covered. Here are the daily habits that actually protect the mucosal armor. Do these consistently and you're giving your lining the best chance to heal. 1. Choose whole foods and fiber first. Vegetables, legumes, if tolerated, oats, and resistant starches feed mucus-friendly microbes and support mucin production. Vitamins A and D, tryptophan-rich foods, zinc, and glutamine are also supportive for mucosal repair. 2. Avoid frequent ultra-processed foods and suspicious emulsifiers. Aim to reduce foods with long ingredient lists and additives like polysorbate 80, carboxymethylcellulose, and other synthetic emulsifiers that experimental studies link to mucus thinning and microbial encroachment. Swap ready-made dressings, many vegan, milks, and processed baked goods for simple homemade or minimally processed alternatives. 3. Support helpful microbes. Specific probiotic strains, for example certain Lactobacillus rhamnosus strains, have been shown to increase mucus production and help restore goblet cell function in studies. They can be a useful adjunct while you repair the lining. Discuss strain choice with your clinician. 4. Protect your nervous system. Chronic stress and sleep loss worsen intestinal permeability. Simple vagal tone boosting practices. Diaphragmatic breathing for 5 minutes twice daily, 7 to 8 hours of sleep, and brief daily movement. Lower stress hormones and help the barrier heal. This is not woo. Stress physiology changes permeability. 5. Be mindful with NSAIDs, alcohol, and unnecessary antibiotics. These frequently injure mucosal integrity or disrupt microbiota. Work with your clinician to limit or replace them when possible and necessary. Quick printable grocery starter. 1 week focus: leafy greens, cooked oats, ripe bananas, resistant starch when cooled, cooked lentils or chickpeas, if tolerated, bone broth or collagen, pumpkin seeds, zinc, eggs, fatty fish, vitamin A, D support, plain probiotic yogurt or clinician-approved probiotic, aloe gel or slippery elm, as advised, and a certified food-grade bentonite clay product if you decide to trial the mucosal matrix. You're not failing. Your approach so far has been the right kind of brave. Now we're adding tools that fix the roof instead of just moving the furniture. If you want a clinician-curated starter, SynoGut, check the link in the description. And please, before you start clays or mucilage protocols, run it past your care team, especially if you're on prescription drugs or immunosuppressants. You deserve to eat without constant fear, and repair is possible. This video explains a biologically plausible pathway and a pragmatic repair strategy, but it is not a medical prescription. If you have Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, or are on immunosuppressive therapy, coordinate any changes with your gastroenterology team. If you experience severe worsening, high fever, fainting, severe bleeding, seek urgent care.